Right. On Global Mirror, we understand as to what will be the repercussions of the war in West Asia for the rest of the world. Are we really looking at possibly a world war or at least a much larger scale regional war? We have representatives from the United States, China, Israel, and of course India joining me in a short break. Stay tuned.
सारा लगा लिया। क्या करूंगी इतने से बेसन से?
बेसन से वेजी फ्रिटर्स, ओकरा फ्राइज,
ग्राम फ्लोर पिज़्ज़ा क्रस्ट,
चॉप्स एंड कटलेट्स,
ब्रेड पकोड़ा,
बेसन भजी,
बेसन वड़ा।
जरूर घर में फिलिप्स एयर फ्रायर होगा। सिर्फ इसी में है 2 लेयर बास्केट और स्टारफिश डिजाइन विद परफेक्ट कुकिंग और ढेरों डिशेस। सो व्हाट्स न्यू ऑन द मेन्यू?
Innovation and you, Philips.
Presenting the new Skoda sports range. Live the thrill.
Skoda.
Let yourself flow with the turn of each tide.
Salty winds, you sweeten your ride. Maharashtra is a hit.
Maharashtra tourism.
मिले 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 हाँ छुआ जिसे करेगा यार मिले 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 हाँ
हम यूं ही मिलकर इस नए भारत में 4 चांद लगाते रहेंगे, बस एक नए नाम के साथ और आपके भरोसे के साथ।
L&T स्विचगियर बिजनेस अब बन गया है लॉरेट्स नुत्सन।
Presenting partner IDFC First Bank. Always you first.
So are we heading into World War III? Now, I of course began that with a caveat. That's not me or my team at Mirror saying this. It's what's been the constant chatter on social media and mainstream media ever since Iran 24 hours ago unleashed a barrage of missiles into Israel. The Israel-Iran conflict has evolved from being what was for decades a proxy war between Israel and Iran's proxies around Israel, and that has evolved into, for the first time, a more direct confrontation, raising concerns over its regional and global implications. Historically, both nations have supported various factions across West Asia and the Middle East, with Iran backing groups like the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen and the Hamas in Gaza, and Israel conducting airstrikes against all of these rebel groups in these countries to counter the Iranian influence. What we are now confronted with is a very delicate regional balance of power, and I would invite our viewers to look very closely at the graphic you can see on your screens here. In a world which is, or at least in a region which is increasingly being polarized between Iran and Israel, we have had nations such as the United States, which are firmly allied with Israel to the point of aiding and abetting its efforts. Similarly, on the other side, you have Russia, which is firmly allied with Iran. Then there are other blocks of countries with slightly conflicting interests. There's China, which is leading towards, there's Russia, which is leading towards Iran, but understands its sensitivities in the region, while China is firmly pro-Iran. And there's also the European Union, which has trade interests with Iran, although they are vastly impacted and vastly scuppered with the sanctions the United States has imposed upon Iran. And then there's India, which finds itself in a very delicate position, balancing its ties with both Iran and Israel amid escalating tensions. The United States, a key ally, remains concerned about Iran's nuclear ambitions, while the EU struggles to navigate its commitment on both sides. China and Russia are strengthening its ties with Iran, complicating the geopolitical landscape. Of concern is Iran's advancements in the nuclear program, which are particularly alarming as they threaten to spark a nuclear arms race in the region. And the lack of mediation, especially coming in from a body which is supposed to do it, which is the UNSC, is only further complicating resolution efforts. Ultimately, the Israel-Iran conflict poses a significant threat to global stability with potential disruptions to oil supplies and increased refugee flows. The international community, therefore, needs to acknowledge the interconnected nature of these tensions and strive for diplomatic solutions. And let's have a conversation on that. In that regard, we are being joined by Dr. John Harrison, who is, of course, a Homeland Security expert joining us from the United States. Prabhu Dayal, former ambassador from India, Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence officer, and of course, and also geopolitical analyst, and Ayana Tanjan, senior fellow at the Thai Institute, chairman, Asia Initiatives. Thank you all, gentlemen, for joining me on this debate at this point. Let me start with you, Avi Melamed. The question is, on a day when we are now understanding that Israel has opened a fourth direct war against Syria with airstrikes being conducted in Damascus, is this a fight that Israel can realistically win or even in control? Because the West Asian region in the last 12 months, especially in the last 1 month, seems to be hurtling towards a point of no return and a very dangerous cocktail of violence and geopolitical tensions from where there might be no coming back.
Thank you for having me. Very shortly, look, Israel has been operating in Syria for a long period of time as part of the Israeli attempts to intercept the Iranian attempts to build a military infrastructure in Syria that will be part of what we call the ring of fire surrounding Israel. So the Israeli attacks in Syria are not something new. And this is part of the ongoing Israeli attempt to confront the Iranian threat. We have to look at things in a wider perspective and remind ourselves something very simple. Iran has been threatening Israel for the last 40 years, and not only threatening Israel, Iran has been building an infrastructure, a military infrastructure, the axis of resistance, composed of armies of terror like Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Shiites in Iraq and so on. And those armies of terror have been attacking Israel constantly for the last 40 years. So we are actually in the midst of a very long, ongoing standoff between Israel and Iran and its proxies. Now we reach to the point where this is the moment of truth, because Israel cannot any longer continue in a situation where it is becoming hostage to the Iranians or to their proxies, and that has to be changed from the roots. And this is what's going to happen now on the ground.
But Mr. Melamed, with all due respect, what about escalation here? Because so far, as you pointed, this has been a long-going conflict going on for several decades, but so far Israel's fight with Iran has been limited to its proxies in Israel's neighboring nations. Yesterday, we saw Israel, for the first time in a really long time, notwithstanding what happened 6 months ago, taking direct action against Israel. And we saw perhaps potentially even the failure of the much-vaunted Iron Dome, which is one of the key defense strategies of Israel. Is Israel prepared to, how exactly is Israel planning to hit back at Iran, and is it prepared to deal with further repercussions from Iran, and are we looking at a possible direct Israel-Iran conflict?
There is already an direct Israel-Iran conflict. It's not the choice of Israel. This is the choice of Iran. Look, Israel is fighting for its existence and its survival, and Israel has to do whatever it takes to ensure that. Iran basically declared a war on Israel by sending its proxies and now attacking Israel directly. Israel will operate apparently in Iran, and Israel will move quite strongly in Iran. I think the Israeli response is going to be coordinated with the United States. I don't think necessarily that Israel will go for, at this point, the most critical infrastructure of the Iranians, but I would expect that the Israeli response will be such that will make the Iranians understand that if there is going to be further escalation, if they are not going to cease their attacks on Israel, the next targets will be critical infrastructure for the mullah regime in Tehran. You deal with a brutal regime, dangerous regime that is brutalizing its people. It's brutalizing the world, brutalizing the region, terrorizing the region. You have to deal with this challenge, because if you don't deal with the bully when it's little, you have to deal with it when it's big, and this is exactly what happened.
Aina Tanjan coming here, one of the statements made by the Ayatollah of Iran was that for the benefit and peace of that region, the United States and its other Western allies have to get out of that region here. Is that what is perhaps the genesis of this entire conflict that we are seeing in the Middle East and West Asia? We are seeing a scramble for West Asia. It's not just the European Union or the West. It's also countries like Russia, countries like China, even countries like India trying to leverage the strategic interest in the region. I say it's like a scramble for Asia because it mirrors what we saw in Africa in the 19th and 20th century in the scramble for Africa. And now we have all these competing parts trying to leverage their interest in order to benefit from the oil reserves. And is that what is leading us into this potentially irreconcilable no way out conflict which may threaten to build into a world war?
Symmetry, an absurd equivalence between the protector and the destroyer. Today, tonight actually, the Jewish people will welcome the new year.
Aina Tanjan, that question was for you.
I can't hear you.
No, Mr. Tanjan, can you hear me? I would just like to request an audio check, otherwise. That question was for Aina Tanjan. Mr. Tanjan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, Mr. Tanjan, I would just like to repeat my question and sum it up a bit shorter. Are we looking at a scramble for West Asia between the European Union, between the United States, China and Russia, leading to this conflict escalating and becoming far greater than a conflict between neighboring nations?
Who is that addressed to?
To you, sir. Aina Tanjan, that question was to you.
I'm sorry, you cut out there. Are you talking? This is Einar Tang, and are you addressing that question to me?
Yes, that question is to you, sir. Okay, all right. I think we'll try and come back to you because we can't afford to continuously be stuck with this. So I'll come back, and I hope my crew has gotten the audio sorted with him. But let me bring that question across to Dr. John Harrison. Dr. Harrison, apologies for the intermission in this point. But if we can bring in into what the Ayatollah has said, that if there has to be lasting peace in the region, then the United States and its allies need to get out of the Middle East. Is that a charge which the United States is willing to accept?
Well, first of all, I'm actually based here in the region, so the conflict has quite a bit of personal interest for me. But no, the U.S. has been involved in the region, as many countries have, for decades. This is both, it's more than just energy. There's a geopolitical interest here as well. And it's unrealistic. The region, other than Iran, the region doesn't want it. The U.S. has been changing its position and, in fact, has been trying to reposition itself away from West Asia to other parts of the continent. So I think that's an unrealistic understanding of how the world works. I get why Iran would say that because they don't like the challenge. They don't like to face an alliance of nations against them because it interferes with their interests. But if Iran wants peace in the region, it has a lot to say in that. We have to remember that it was Iran who launched the attack against Israel in April, and it was Iran who launched the attack last night. So it's Iran who can control its proxy in Lebanon and have Hezbollah meet its requirements that it has been faced since 2006, when the UN General Assembly said the Security Council said that you have to withdraw from above the Yangtze River. So, I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy there, but hypocrisy and politics seem to be synonymous terms. So I don't think Iran should be held to a standard on hypocrisy that no one else is. But they are in an existential threat right now. The Israelis have proven once again that their intelligence services are able to strike sort of at will, both in Iran for the last number of years, but also against major proxies for Iran. So it's really their choice. If they don't want to escalate and if they want to be
Dr.
taken
Harrison,
seriously.
with all due respect, Dr. Harrison, with all due respect, you mentioned that Iran feels a bit challenged, which is why it's crying foul. With all due respect, that's exactly the response we seem to have got from the Western world in the last 24 hours. Let's be honest, for much of the last 1 year, especially in the last 1 month, Israel has been pounding civilian areas, trying to target rebels, whether it be Houthi rebels or Hezbollah in neighboring nations, but there has been a significant civilian loss here. Yesterday was the first time in many days that Israel was directly at the receiving end of airstrikes, and yet then we see these voices of condemnation and outrage coming in from Western powers, including the United States. Isn't there a basic hypocrisy at play there?
Well, but remember how this all started on October 7th. One of Iran's proxies launched an invasion of a member of the United Nations. They committed acts that under normal circumstances would have been considered war crimes. The Israelis have a right to defend themselves. The proportionality here is not that a nation state, a member in good standing of the United Nations, went to commit any war crimes. The groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, and to a lesser degree the Houthis, intentionally put weapon systems within their civilian population. So, these groups have agendas on their own, certainly, but they're also proxies of a larger power. And there are limitations of what those groups can do, but there are also some control that Iran does have. And if they had chosen to, they could have taken any decisions that they wanted to. They chose to escalate both in April and again last night. Certainly, any war, there are multiple parties, and there is no time in a limited session to be able to talk about every single issue that has driven the conflict. But certainly, since October 7th, it has been very much driven by Iran and its proxies. So if peace wants to break out in the region, Iran has a major role to play in this, and they can claim anything they want. But it is not Western powers that have caused this. It is decisions that their proxies and they have made.
Okay. Let me now try and bring in Einar Tangent once again at this point. Einar, if you can hear me. Einar, the question is, do you agree with the view that we've just heard from the United States that it's not the West that needs to be blamed for the conflict that's happening right now in West Asia, it's Iran and its proxies?
Well, the difficulty here is that you have two bad actors. You have Iran that has used proxies, Hamas, etc., to get at Israel. But you have to understand, we have to go back before. Everything didn't happen just on the 7th. This is something that's been brewing for a long time, and most of it is due to the fact that Israel, through Netanyahu, has been disingenuous about going forward with this two-state solution. This is what the rest of the world has agreed to. It's what Israel agreed to, but there has been bad faith. Obviously, we all know that Hamas was funded through the Israeli government from monies provided by other Arab nations. They were giving that money to there. They were cooperating to a certain extent. And then all of a sudden, the dog that they were raising bit them. And why did they do this? Because they wanted to maintain that it was impossible to deal with Palestine because it had too many voices. China united the 27 of them, but that was too late for Israel. They said they're not going. Now, I would like to point out something my colleague just said recently. Just before. He said that Israel has been able to strike for years with impunity because of their superior intelligence services. And then he said, well, Iran has started this all, and he mentioned 2 dates. Well, either one is true or the other is true, but they both can't be true. So I would suggest that he clear up his ambiguity there about that. You have two bad actors. You have a situation where Israel is now a war criminal state. It has been acknowledged by the ICC. It has been acknowledged by the UN. They're now banning the head of the UN, and they're engaging in invasion of other countries. It cannot be justified on the fact that he did wrong, so therefore it's okay for me to do wrong. This idea that I have the right to defend myself, that applies to all nations. All nations have the right to defend themselves, and that includes, all the countries that they're attacking: Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen. They are locked in this because of the fact that Israel will not give in to this idea of a two-state solution.
All right. Ambassador Prabhu, I know you have been waiting very patiently but since since INR has come up with some very strong words, again, he has called them two rotten actors or two wrong actors. Let me just go across to the representatives of US and Israel, and before I promise I'll come to Ambassador Dayal. Avi, Melamed, would you like to respond to what INR said? Because at the end of the day, if Israel goes on attacking Lebanon, goes on attacking Syria, goes on attacking Gaza, can it really absolve itself from any accountability if these nations hit back? Avi Melamed. All right. Dr. John Harrison, would you like to respond to that statement?
Yeah, first, just as a matter of technical connection, I certainly don't represent the United States view, and I'm sure the administration would be very happy to know that I'm correcting that. Listen, the beauty of politics is that two things can be the same, even if they seem mutually exclusive. But in this case, and I don't mean to trivialize, but in this case, but the reality of what drove this conflict, starting this round at least, to be more technically correct, in October 7th, is that there was a major geostrategic change in the region. Trade and trade routes were becoming very important. The Saudis looked like they were ready to be able to follow, to some degree, whatever the exact terms would be, the Abraham Accords, or at least the structures of those. Iran, and particularly Hamas, realized that their age in the Middle East seems to have passed, and they had no retort to that. So this is about a number of issues, but there's certainly the region is changing, and Hamas and Iran are on the wrong side of history on this one. And their only response to what seemed to be positive changes was to unleash another round.
The argument continues of who exactly is on the wrong side of history. Let me then get in Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, someone who understands the region. Yes, Dr. Harrison, would you just like to conclude your point?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I thought you were asking me. The audio cut out again. I apologize.
No, I get your point, Dr. Harrison. I was actually moving on to my next guest, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, who's been waiting quite patiently. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us, Ambassador Dayal. India right now is walking a real tightrope, isn't it, sir? Because on one hand, India has these very strong cultural relations with Israel. We have seen the close personal bonhomie on display between Prime Minister Modi and Benjamin Netanyahu. But India also has equally strong ties with Iran, especially over trade and economics here. For the last 2 years, ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, we have seen India doggedly sticking on to its stand of non-alignment, of not buying down to either world order, whether it be the Western or the other. But this is perhaps the first biggest test so far of how much India can take a stand. India can walk the tightrope without actually having to take a stand.
Well, you rightly said that India has good relations with both Israel and Iran. And therefore, we are anguished at the fact that this horrible war is taking place in the Middle East region, which is so near to our own country. Now, India has steadfastly espoused its belief that we believe that the world is one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And we also believe that since we are one family, we have one future, and that our futures are therefore interconnected. So India would like to see this war come to an end as soon as possible. This war is not going to profit anybody. Now, at the same time, things are beyond our control because the circumstances are such that the momentum is itself driving the war forward. Israel launched certain attacks against the Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah's leader, Nasrallah, was killed, along with some other top Hezbollah leaders. So Iran has launched these missiles, and I'm sure that Israel will now retaliate in a very big fashion. So the momentum is driving the war forward, and we are looking aghast at what is happening and are totally unable to stop this chain of
But
events.
Ambassador Dayal, will
which
India
is
then be forced into taking a stand? I'll sum up the Israel paradox very quickly for our viewers. On one hand, we have this, as I keep repeating, this close culture, this close proximity and personal friendship between the leaders of the two nations. Yet, India's stand historically, and correct me if I'm wrong, has always been that it is in favor of the two-state solution, something which Israel is absolutely vehemently opposed to. For how long can India afford to walk both sides of the tightrope and before actually being forced into taking a stand, something which will have its consequences?
Well, let me say that not only is India in favor of the two-state solution, but President Biden himself has said that there is no alternative to the two-state solution. So everybody realizes that Israel and the Palestinians must coexist within safe boundaries. And therefore, it's not that we are walking a tightrope. We are just trying to say what all right-thinking countries also have been saying, that if this war has come to an end, we have to address the fundamental and the root problem, which is that relating to the homeland for the Palestinians. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians have a right to exist in safe and secure boundaries. We are being impacted by this war in a number of ways. First of all, oil prices will impact our economy. Freights have gone up because of the problems in the Red Sea area. We have invested in the Chabahar port. Then we were planning the IMEC route, the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, which would pass through UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and connect us to Europe. So all that is adversely affected. India wants this war to come to an end soon, but there is very little that we can do directly in this regard.
I think I have time for one last question. So let me hope that I can put that across to Aina Tanjan. Aina, the most important fear in everyone's mind is what if this goes nuclear? Because in the lack of any obvious effort to moderate this burgeoning conflict in West Asia, the fear is that Iran, with its questionable nuclear record in terms of being a rogue nuclear state, will either find its nuclear facilities targeted by Israel or will be forced to use its nuclear weapons in a last-ditch attempt to try and in terms of shielding itself if Israel does launch a direct offensive here. With much of the world nation and the world powers being divided on the spectrum, is there a genuine fear of the nuclear threat becoming a reality? Aina Tanjan.
Yes, but remember, the worst kept secret in the world is that Israel has at least 120 nuclear weapons and the means to make 80 more. It's Iran, it's not known what they have. They have already signaled just before this conflict that they wanted to have talks in order to go back to the table that was walked away from by Donald Trump when he said he was not going to honor the deal that the U.S. had made. So it's not clear what they have, but it's very clear that Israel, if they are pushed, they run out of ammunition, that they might consider tactical nukes on the battlefield and perhaps even more larger nukes in terms of dealing with Iran. This would, of course, signal perhaps the end, the beginning of an escalation that could encompass the entire world. This is not what we want, but I don't understand why no one wants to talk about the fact that Israel has these nuclear weapons, and based on the statements that have been made by Netanyahu and his cabinet, that they will do everything necessary to show that they cannot be intimidated and they will finish doing whatever they wish to any country that opposes them.
So that is quite cautious note to end it on that note. On the debate, the fact still remains that the nuclear option is very much on the table, and we are talking of two nations who have shown that that no option is really off the table when it comes to desperation in terms of counter-reacting and hitting back. One only hopes that the larger sense prevails and other countries in the world, leading countries in the world, whether it be the liberal order, whether it be India, and whether it be China and Russia, put their economic and strategic interests aside and push for de-escalation rather than encouraging escalation by proxy. Dr. Harrison, Prabhu Avi Melamed, and also Aina, thank you so much for joining me on this very illuminating discussion on the global mirror. It's time for a short break. More news and updates continue on the other side. Stay tuned to Mirror Now.